this is the Provoked Prawn, and this is Lian Li's Strimer Plus V2. These are GPU and motherboard extension cables that essentially give you RGB lighting. Now this is version 2 of their kit, which now features a few improvements, including slimmed down cables, an improved control box, and support for Lian Li's L-Connect version 3 software. So it's new and improved and enhanced. And in this video, I'm going to be showing you the installation process for the two kits that I have, which is the 24-pin motherboard power supply connection and then a dual 8-pin connection for the GPU. You can also get a triple 8-pin connection as well. So there's another option if you have 3 power connectors on your graphics card, you can do that. But in this video I'm going to be showing you the setup, and as you saw, it's in the Lian Li Air Mini alongside a load of other things that I've done videos on previously, including the Galahad cooler and some Lian Li Uni fans. Now in the box you don't get very much, but you obviously have all the essential parts, and actually the setup for these things is remarkably easy, and I think they might be one of the easiest ways to add RGB lighting to your case if you're not interested in RGB fans but still want some nice accents. They work as extension leads to the power supply cables that you already have installed, so they don't plug directly into the power supply unit but instead connect up to the power supply cables at the rear of your case, which is actually really beneficial because, as you'll see, they neaten things up because the cabling is all neatly kept together with various clips, and obviously has that sort of plastic housing on it as well, which means that it just looks a lot neater even without the RGB turned on. So I'm starting with the 24-pin cable, which, as you can see, comes out of the box looking quite stiff, but it is obviously very flexible because you can bend it round and create shape with it in order to fit it in the case and show off some of that lighting. One side has the RGB lighting and the other one doesn't, obviously, and basically you have the RGB cables sitting on top of the power cables so that the nonsense is hidden but the RGB lighting is fully visible. You can see there are several clips that hold it together and make sure that all the cabling sort of stays nice and looks pristine, and there are some extra clips included in the box, so you can see them here. So you can swap the black ones out that are either end of the connector and put these white ones in their place if you prefer, so it's an additional way to customize the look of it. So you can see basically these clips would fit where the black bits sit at the moment and change the look and feel of the cables. Now in the box for the 24-pin you also have the controller, which comes with a magnet system to hold it in place and a 3M sticker, so you have the choice of those. I don't actually end up using either of those, but it's going to depend on your case and where you're installing it. There's also an all-important cable which is multifunctional because it connects up various things from the control box to your motherboard, and I'll show you the process for installing these, but just quickly show you the cables. So these cables are a variety of things. You have a micro USB connection cable, you also have an RGB cable and a USB cable. So the RGB cable is designed to connect to your motherboard, to give your motherboard control over the RGB lighting if you want to do that instead of the L-Connect software. And you also have USB cable that connects to the motherboard that's required to use L-Connect 3 with this control box. Now this is new and improved control box and give you better control over the Strimer Plus V2. Now this control box is able to connect up both the 24-pin and your 8-pin GPU connections, and you'll see that there are multiple different connectors on it. You'll have one at the end for the 24-pin and then 2 side ones. It also has a SATA power connection connected up to it already, so you need to make sure you plug in this flat power connector to your power supply unit. Then you plug in the end connector that comes out of the RGB cable into the end of the control box. You can see you could potentially plug it in on the side, but you're meant to plug it into the end one, and those side ones are reserved for the triple or double pin GPU connectors, and there's also a switch there. Note that because I'll show you a bit later on what that does. Now the other cables, as I've mentioned already, you have several different choices here. So you have this one that plugs in next to the SATA power connection. This is the RGB connector. This will plug into the RGB header on your motherboard. You need to make sure you look at the manual for this because there may be multiple different RGB headers and you need to make sure you plug it into the right one. Alternatively, you can use the micro USB connection. You don't necessarily need to plug both of these in. The RGB connector essentially gives your motherboard control over the RGB lighting, which means you can sync it up with other things that connect to your motherboard, or the motherboard's lighting in general, whereas the USB connection gives the connection to the L-Connect software so that you can do the RGB lighting via that way and connect everything up nicely. Now here's the double 8-pin GPU connector. So this is a PCIe connection that gives you the RGB lighting. This is purchased separately, so these are two separate purchases, but they both plug into the same control box. The manual that's included with this one notes that you can use the control box, and that's how you get the best results. But they also do include this adapter, which essentially takes the cable that comes off this power supply cable and plugs into the RGB header on your motherboard. So if you are planning on using RGB controlled exclusively by your motherboard and you're not worried about L-Connect, that is an option. Like the 24-pin, you also have the extra white connectors in there so that you can put them on in place of the black ones that are there and holding it all in place as standard. You'll see it's basically the same logic though. You have some very flexible cables, but are all held in place with some clips. You'll notice that as well as the black clips, there are some translucent plastic clips on the underside that then have a slight sort of clip over the top. Those hold things in place, and you have the option of swapping out the black clips that are at either end with these white ones instead to change the look of it. This is going to be a personal preference thing. I think once it's in the case, you then need to decide what sort of theme you're going for and whether you want to use the black or the white ones. I personally like the black for the contrast between the white and black, but it's really a personal choice. You don't need to use this. You can set it up the way you want to. The nice thing about both these cables is essentially you have the power cables on the underside, and then you have the RGB lighting that's diffused nicely on the top, and the setup is really straightforward, as you can see. So this cable that's coming out of the top of this one plugs into the control box, and as I said, there are two connectors on the side of the control box. One is ever so slightly larger than the other one, so you can't actually plug these in the wrong place. One's designed for the triple 8-pin PCIe connector, and the other one's designed for the double. You have a switch that switches between the two, so you can't get it wrong which way around you use, but you make sure you have your switch pointing in the right direction for it to work. The next stage, obviously, we're going about the installation process. So I'm removing the motherboard cable that's already plugged in. Now this is the power supply cable that's connected up to PSU already. Note I have unplugged this computer from the mains. Don't try and do this while the power's plugged in, that would be terrible. So unplug it and make sure you've done that before you start. And then we're going about the process of essentially putting this extension lead in place between the power supply cable and the motherboard. And then it requires a little bit of fiddling. Now, as you'll see from these shots, I found it a bit tricky and fiddly in order to get the two to connect together. You can't do this the wrong way around. There's only one way that it will work. There's a clip on the underside which connects up to the power supply cable. It's basically the same logic as it would be if it was plugged directly into the motherboard, but it does require a bit of convincing. I found that when I was trying to push them together, one end of the connector was going in, the other end wasn't, so they weren't properly seating together. Now, if you don't get these clips in properly and push them all the way in, you won't get the power running through, so it won't power on your computer. So it's really important that you make sure that these are pushed together, the clips held in place at the underside, and it's basically all connected up nicely. This gives us quite an excess of power cables, as you'll see in a minute, at the back of the case to deal with, but it does mean that you can then run this through and hide away the boring cables in place of these nice shiny RGB ones. They are obviously a lot neater as well, so if you're a fan of cable management and you're not very good at it, then this is a good way to make it look like you're good at it and add some RGB lighting to the case. So it's ideal for me because I suck at cable management, as you probably know. Now, you can run these cables through to the back. They require quite a lot of convincing, and as you can see in the Air Mini, they're quite big, and so they end up sticking out quite a lot initially. I had to go around to the back of the case and then try and negotiate things around to move the cables back to the back. So obviously we then end up with a lot of extra cabling from the 24-pin connection at the rear, which I then have to find a spot for. Now, in my case, I'm not using hard disk drives, so I end up putting some of the cabling in there. But what I did find is that when I started to pull the cable through from the strimmer, it actually sort of split in two, because essentially I was tugging on one end but not the other bit. So there's a sort of, the power cables and the RGB cables are kind of separate, so you need to make sure you're sort of pulling and pushing in order to convince the whole thing to come through. You'll know what I mean when you try and do this yourself, but essentially you've got to make sure that the whole thing's coming through, not just part of it, otherwise one bit's tight and the other bit's loose and it ends up looking messy. So there's a lot of convincing of getting it through and then pulling it into the other side. Also, obviously, we need to make sure we pull through that cable that connects up to the control box and then find somewhere to mount the control box. And this is going to be one of the problems, but I'll demonstrate where I did it and the logic for it. Obviously, as I noted already, you have a 3M sticker and a magnet that you can use to hold it in place if you have somewhere spare. There's a lot of extra cabling here to negotiate around though, and so I'm going to make use of my hard disk drive tray, which I'm not actually using for hard drives. But you can see, obviously, we need to hide away the 24-pin PSU cable as a start. Now, I don't have any space here, unfortunately, because the control box is a bit too fat, so it won't sit on top of a hard disk drive tray, because then the back door won't go on. So I've then got to work out what I'm going to do with it. So I already have the control box for the Lian Li Unifans in the top of the hard disk drive tray, so I've just hidden that in the bottom. So there's 2 levels, because luckily there's no drives in there. So I'm going to use the second level for the box, because that means I can tuck it out of sight. I obviously need to run the USB cable down to the bottom of the case and plug that into the motherboard, and I'll show you where in a minute. And then make sure the SATA power is connected up. So the flat power connection that's usually used for control boxes, hard drives, SSDs and other things should have a spare one. If you haven't already, check out my PSU videos on where you plug those in and where they connect up to. And then obviously we also have the RGB connection if we want it. Plug that cable in to the end of the controller, and then you obviously have this set up for the 24-pin. Now, you could just use the 24-pin cable. You don't have to use the other one for your graphics card. I think even this would be simple enough to add a nice bit of RGB light into the case. But the basic next part is to make sure it's connected up via USB, and then it will work via the L-Connect software. And I'll show you the L-Connect software in a bit. Obviously that gives you control over the lighting, so you can change it away from the rainbow effects and into other things. Here you can see the 2 8-pin connector. And again, this is the same sort of logic. It basically just plugs into the control box. You have to plug it into one. There are 2 options, but you only can fit it in one of them, and the other one is for the triple 8-pin GPU PSU connection. So you can see on the instruction manual that there is a note about it, and there's a switch next to both those ports. You either flip it to the left for the triple 8-pin or to the right for the double 8-pin. So make sure, if it's not working, you can't work out why, it's probably that switch is what I found. So you need to make sure it's flicked in the right direction, so it's basically flicked towards the cable that you're using. This is an interesting point because it probably means that you can't use both if you were planning on doing that for some reason. Worth noting. Now, obviously, we also have this connection set up, and we need to plug in the power cable. So I've already removed my graphics card from this case, and I'm basically just tugging out the cables that I had at the front and then plugging them in here. Again, it's the same sort of logic. This is essentially just working as an extension cable from the power supply cables you already have. You can't plug it directly into your power supply unit. It's just an extra bit of lead, which makes things a bit neater at the front, but a hell of a lot messier at the back. The clip that holds it in place, you can see, clicks over onto the extension cable. It's impossible to get these the wrong way around. They have it set up so that the pin is basically facing there, and then you just click it in. It clicks in place, and I found these a lot easier to connect than the 24-pin, so they just connect up really simply. Then we've got to find somewhere to hide these, so a little bit of cable tidying was necessary to both hold them together and to convince them to hide at the back of the case. We then have to run the cable through to the front. Now, I ran it through at the side, but you might actually find it's beneficial to run it through at the bottom. There's quite a bit of extra length here. This is going to vary depending on your case. In this case, you can't necessarily run it through from the bottom, but if you're running a larger case, you might find that you could run it through to the bottom of the case and then run it up towards your graphics card. That way you could maximize the amount of RGB lighting. And I'll show you what I mean in a minute, but as you can see, I have it coming out of the bottom near the fans at the very bottom of the case, and it then sort of goes off to the side and fits in. So obviously reseating a graphics card, this is the Gigabyte 3090 RTX graphics card, and making sure that's held back in place with the screws to hold it in place, obviously, and then just go about putting the cables in here. Now you can see what I'm talking about because of the way I've got it coming through. It's coming through sort of at an angle, so the cables actually bend round ever so slightly. So trying to convince it to come around so that you can actually make the most of that RGB lighting is a little bit tricky. So if you have a larger case, you could come out from the bottom underneath the motherboard, for example. That would look a lot neater. Now, obviously, then just seating the double 8-pin PCIe cables back into the ports and then putting them in place. And once that's done, they're all clipped up. But you can see already it looks a lot neater and a lot nicer than standard cables for sure. And because everything's held with those little plastic clips, and just because you have the RGB sort of sitting over the top of the power cables, it looks a lot neater and a lot more presentable. I will, however, show you what it looks like on a Founders Edition card a little bit later on, and it certainly doesn't look as nice there, unfortunately, because of the extra adapter that you need to use. But the final product looks pretty good. I'm pretty happy with it. It's a very nice bit of extra enhanced aesthetic for your case. Even when it's not powered on, everything just looks a lot smarter. Don't forget that you need to run the USB cable from the control box through down the back and then through the bottom somewhere, and in order to plug it into the bottom of the motherboard. Usually you'll find USB marks on the motherboard headers at the bottom. They're fairly straightforward. It's not the same as the front panel connections, but you will find it down the bottom in the middle usually. And reference your motherboard manual to work out exactly where if you're not sure, but basically there's a little adapter down the bottom there. I'm already using one for my Lian Li fans, and I'm using this other one obviously to plug those cables in separately. And then we're done, so now we can power it on and make sure everything's working. It's worth doing this before putting it back on your desk and plugging it into your monitor and other things. First time that I did this, I found that the two 8-pin power connector one wasn't working. The RGB wasn't shining through on it, and the reason for that was I hadn't flicked that switch, so make sure you flick the switch over. But also the other thing to think about is where the pipes are coming from your AIO, if you happen to have one. You can see this angle there slightly getting in the way, and then trying to work out the best position for them to make the most of the lighting from those cables. The finished product looks the business, actually really adds a nice aesthetic to it, and I think a very nice addition to the case. Really sets off the Air Mini, makes it look fantastic. Now in a second I'll show you what you can do with the L-Connect software and also what it looks like with a Founders Edition card. But the end result I'm very happy with. It looks a lot neater than standard cables and is very presentable. Let me know in the comments what you think of this setup. Now I want to quickly demonstrate what I was talking about with the Founders Edition card. So you can see a 3060 Ti here and the design of what that looks like. Now this is obviously going to be specific to the case and also the card because of that extension lead that's required to power it, but you can see the cables are sitting rather low here. I could tug a bit of it to the back, but it doesn't look ideal. But we're going to ignore that for a moment and focus on the 24 pin just to demonstrate that within the L-Connect 3 software. L-Connect 3 is being updated and improved and includes controls for both the AL fans and the Strimer. I'm not going to go into the great depth on the software here because that's another video in itself. I want to show some of the different modes that you can see. So doing picture in picture so you can see what's happening. You can see you can control both Strimers from the software and you can adjust through the various different modes, and there are quite a lot of different colors and schemes that you can add in. One of the things that it's pretty neat about it is that each of the cables essentially is customizable in the overall design and color of it, so you can see that you can change color of them on an individual basis and actually change that throughout the various different effects. So you have snooker, for example, and we could set all of that to red so that it goes through different colors, or you could have rainbow effects on each of them with individual different colors going through and creating different effects at different speeds as well, so you can slow things up, speed it up, slow it down, wherever you feel like. You can also see just the sheer number of different visual effects on here. Some of them are really intense and really fast, but you can slow them right down, and there are some very nice ones to look through. Obviously, as I'm going through these, both the 24 pin and the GPU cable are going through the same color schemes, but you can change them separately. And obviously you can see that the AL120s are also customizable in the software, but at the moment I'm having Armory Crate issues which are preventing me from changing the colors on those, so just ignore the fans for a minute and focus on the Strimers. But you can see like you can have these effects quickly skirt across the entirety of the RGB strips and show different effects and different colors there at different speeds. You can change the direction, and you can also apply an entire color to change the entire thing. So I've set it all to blue, for example. But one of the things that I found interesting is also you can switch to a different mode entirely, and the effects then go up and down as well as back and forth, and again different colors, and you can see them running across. You obviously get a visualization of what that looks like in the software, and then you get to see it on the real things. Now I've got some pretty heavy lighting for this video capture, so it's not doing justice to the colors. It's actually a lot nicer looking in real life than it is in the video, unfortunately, but it does still show that they are very bright and very colorful and customizable in a lot of different ways. You can see there's all sorts of different modes that you can go between and you can change between, and you just adjust until your heart's content. Loads of different things in here. So hopefully you found this video useful. Let me know in the comments if you've got any questions, and my thoughts are that the L-Connect software has now been nicely improved and that the Strimers are a fantastic addition. I really think they're easy to install and easy to set up and a lot less hassle than RGB fans, that's for sure. And if you're looking to add some additional nice RGB into your case, then this is one way to do it. One thing to note is if you want to turn them all off, you can just apply a black color to the Strimers and that'll turn the RGB lighting off. So if you need to, you can set it so that they're not showing any RGB at all. This has been the Provoked Prawn. Thanks for watching. Smash that subscribe button and come back for more. This has been the Provoked Prawn. Hope you found this video useful, interesting, hilarious, or otherwise. Take a look at these other videos that I think you might find interesting as well. And have a look at the description for links and other information you might find useful. Click that join button to see the benefits of being a member of my YouTube channel. And most importantly, have a great life.